Poor Waitress found a shivering boy in the alley, took him home, unaware he was Mafia boss's son. The smell of burnt coffee and old grease clung to Lena Brooks like a second skin. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and the last customer at the Greasy Spoon Diner, a trucker nursing a cup of black coffee for over an hour, had finally settled his bill and lumbered out into the frigid raven-shade night. Lena sighed. Rubbing the small of her back, every muscle ached. She'd been on her feet for 10 hours straight, covering a double shift for a coworker who had called in sick, all for a handful of crumpled bills in her apron pocket that barely covered the cost of her bus pass, let alone next week's rent. "Night, Sal," she called out, her voice hoarse. Sal, the night cook, grunted from behind the sizzling grill he was scraping down. "Lock up tight, kid. It's a cold one." Lena nodded, though he could not see her. She pulled her thin coat tighter, grabbed the last heavy, leaking bag of garbage from the bin, and pushed open the diner's back door. The alley was a narrow canyon of brick and iron, choked with the metallic stink of the dumpsters. The November wind howled through it, a physical, biting thing that sliced through her cheap coat and stung her cheeks. She hurried toward the massive steel dumpster at the far end, her only thought to get the task done and get home to her small, cold apartment. She heaved the bag, grunting at the weight, and managed to toss it inside. As she turned to leave, a sound stopped her. It was a whimper, small, thin, and desperate. Lena froze. Her first thought was a stray cat, or perhaps one of the city's oversized rats. She almost ignored it. It was not her business. In Ravenshade, minding your own business was the first rule of survival. But the sound came again, sharper this time, a choked-off sob. Her eyes scanned the deep shadows. The alley was lit by a single, flickering bulb above the diner's door, casting more shadow than light. "Hello?" she called out, her voice sounding small against the wind. "Nothing." She took a hesitant step forward, peering into the dark space between the dumpster and the damp brick wall. Is someone there? And then she saw him. He was curled into a tight ball, pressed so far back into the recess that he seemed part of the grime. A little boy. He could not have been older than 7, perhaps 8 at the most. He was wearing clothes that might have once been nice, dark jeans and a small peacoat, but they were now torn, filthy, and entirely inadequate for the freezing temperature. His body was shaking in violent, uncontrollable shudders. "Oh my God!" Lena whispered. She moved closer, crouching down. Hey, are you okay? Are you hurt?" The boy flinched, pressing himself harder against the wall. His face was pale with cold and streaked with dirt, but it was his eyes that pierced her. They were wide, dark, and filled with a terror so profound it looked ancient. A dark, ugly bruise was blooming on his left cheekbone, and his lip was split and caked with dried blood. He did not say a word. He just watched her, his breathing coming in tiny, hitched gasps. "I'm not going to hurt you," Lena said, keeping her voice low and soft. "It is freezing out here. You cannot stay here." She reached a hand out slowly. He recoiled as if she had tried to strike him. Lena pulled her hand back, her heart clenching. She looked up and down the empty, dark alley. There was no one, no parent calling his name, no sign of how he had gotten there. He was just lost. She fumbled in her pocket for her cheap, cracked smartphone. Her fingers were numb, barely able to type the 3 numbers. She called the police. The dispatcher's voice was flat, bored. "Ravenshade PD. "Oh, what's your emergency?" I found a child," Lena stammered, keeping her eyes on the boy. "He's behind the Greasy Spoon Diner on 3rd Street. He's all alone, and he looks hurt. He's freezing." "Address," Lena confirmed it. "Okay, ma'am. We have a 5-car pileup on the interstate and a domestic dispute on the east side. All units are tied up. It might be a while." "A while?" Lena's voice rose in disbelief. "How long? He is shivering. I think he is in shock. We will get someone there as soon as we can. Best we can do is maybe an hour, maybe 2. 2 hours. Lena looked at the boy. His lips had a faint blue tinge. In 2 hours, he would not be shivering. He would be still. "No," Lena said, more to herself than the dispatcher. "That is not good enough." She hung up before the dispatcher could reply. She could not leave him. She could not wait. The system had failed her entire life. She would not let it fail this child. "Okay, kid," she said, making her voice firm but gentle. "Here is the deal. I am Lena. I am going to take you somewhere warm. It is just for a little bit, until we can figure this out. I promise I will not let anything happen to you." She stood up and shrugged off her own thin coat, the icy air immediately biting at her arms through her uniform. She knelt and wrapped the coat around his small, trembling frame. It swallowed him whole. He whimpered again, but did not resist when she gently slid her arms under his legs and back. He weighed almost nothing. As she lifted him, his small, ice-cold hands instantly grabbed the front of her shirt, clutching the cheap fabric in a death grip. He buried his bruised face against her shoulder, and she felt the tremors rack his entire body. Lena walked out of the alley, her steps quick and determined, carrying the silent, shivering boy into the night. Her studio apartment was on the 4th floor of a run-down building 6 blocks from the diner. It was one room, with a sagging couch, a kitchenette separated by a beaded curtain, and a bed shoved into the corner. It was not much, but it was clean, and right now, it was warmer than the outside. She locked the 3 deadbolts on her door, a necessity in this neighborhood, and gently set the boy down on her threadbare bath mat. "Okay, first things first, we have to get you warm." She turned the tub's faucet, grimacing as the pipes shuddered and groaned before finally spitting out lukewarm, brownish water. While it heated, she went to the kitchenette. All she had was a half-empty box of crackers and 2 cans of chicken noodle soup. She opened one and dumped it into a pot, turning the stove's burner on low. She returned to the bathroom. The boy had not moved. He just stood on the mat, wrapped in her coat, watching her with those silent, haunted eyes. "This might be a little scary, but we need to get these wet clothes off you," she said softly. She helped him out of her coat and then his own. His clothes were damp and stiff with grime. His small shoes were soaked through. Underneath, his thin sweater was snagged and torn. As she peeled the layers off, she saw the full extent of the bruises. Dark, mottled patches covered his ribs and back. They were not from a simple fall. A cold, hard anger settled in Lena's stomach. Someone had done this to him. She helped him into the tub, testing the water to make sure it was warm but not hot. He winced as the water touched his skin, but then, as the warmth seeped in, a long, shuddering sigh escaped him. It was the most sound he had made yet. Lena gently washed his hair, using her own mint-scented shampoo. She worked the grime from his skin, her touch as light as possible over the bruises. He still refused to speak, but his head tilted into her touch. A small, unconscious movement, like a flower leaning toward the sun. After the bath, she wrapped him in her only clean towel and sat him on her couch. The soup was warm. She poured it into her favorite mug, the one with a chipped rim, and handed it to him. He looked at the steam, then at her. "It is for you," she said. "Go on." He took the mug in both hands and drank, at first sipping, then gulping it down ravenously. He finished the entire mug in less than a minute. "More?" He gave a tiny, hesitant nod. She refilled the mug. While he ate the second serving, Lena found her oldest, softest t-shirt and a pair of worn sweatpants, rolling the hems up so they would not trip him. He was swimming in the clothes, but they were warm and dry. She made a bed for him on the couch, using her spare set of sheets and her thickest blanket. "You can sleep here. It is safe." He climbed onto the couch and curled up, his eyes never leaving her as she turned off the main light, leaving only the small lamp on her nightstand. She got into her own bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. The apartment was quiet, save for the groan of the building's heating and the distant siren wail that was Ravenshade's lullaby. Lena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. What had she done? She had brought a strange, battered child into her home. She had defied the police. She could lose her job, her apartment, everything. A sudden, sharp cry ripped through the darkness. Lena sat bolt upright. The boy was thrashing on the couch, his limbs tangled in the blanket, his eyes squeezed shut. A thin, keening sound escaped his lips. She was out of bed in an instant, kneeling by the couch. "Hey, shh, shh," she whispered, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are okay. You are safe. It was just a dream." He gasped, his eyes flying open, wild and unseeing. "You are safe," Lena repeated, her voice a low murmur. She gently brushed the damp hair off his forehead. "I am right here. No one is going to hurt you." He slowly focused on her face. The panic in his eyes receded, replaced by a bottomless exhaustion. He did not pull away from her touch. Instead, his small hand came up and weakly gripped her wrist. Lena stayed like that, kneeling on the cold floor, her hand on his head, letting him anchor himself to her. She did not know how long they stayed there, but his breathing evened out, and his grip on her wrist loosened as he fell back into a deeper, less troubled sleep, unknowingly. Lena was giving him something he had never truly had, the unconditional, gentle comfort of a mother. She eventually retreated, not to her bed, but to the worn armchair in the corner, where she watched over him for the rest of the night, miles away, in a penthouse office that overlooked the glittering, dark sprawl of Ravenshade. There was no comfort. Dante Moretti stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, his back to the room. He was a tall man, immaculate in a custom-tailored suit, but his tie had been ripped off and his collar was unbuttoned. On the black marble floor near his desk, a heavy crystal tumbler lay shattered in a pool of amber liquid. His three most trusted capos stood silently by the door. They did not move. They barely breathed. They had seen Dante angry, but this was different. This was a cold, silent fury that sucked the air from the room. "He was in his own bed," Dante said, his voice dangerously quiet. "In my house, with 6 of my men on the perimeter and 2 in the hall." He turned slowly. His face was sharp, handsome, but his eyes were black and flat. "He is gone. My son is gone, and my security detail is dead. Explain to me how this happens." No one spoke. "It was an inside job, boss." One of the men, Marco, finally ventured. His voice was rough. "Had to be. The alarms were bypassed. No sign of forced entry. The men in the hall. It was clean. Professional." Dante's jaw tightened. This was a power play. Someone within his own organization, or someone from a rival family who had bought one of his, had found his only weakness, his son, Leo. This was not a kidnapping for ransom, Dante continued, his mind working with lethal precision. There has been no call, no demand. This was a message. He walked to his desk, his movements smooth and controlled. He picked up a framed photograph. It was of a small, dark-haired boy with a shy smile, sitting on Dante's shoulders. "Find him," Dante ordered, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more threatening than any shout. "Use every resource. Tear this city apart, brick by brick. Find out who took my son." He looked at his men, his gaze promising agony. "And when you find them, do not kill them. Bring them to me. I want them to know the difference between a simple message and a declaration of war." The next morning, Lena awoke stiff and cold in the armchair. Sunlight, pale and weak, streamed through her grimy window. The boy was awake. He was sitting up on the couch, the blanket puddled around his waist, watching her. "Good morning," Lena said, her voice rough with sleep. She offered him a small smile. "Did you sleep okay?" He nodded, just once. "I'm going to make some toast," she said, rising and stretching until her back popped. "And I have some apple juice, I think." She busied herself in the kitchenette, her nerves on edge. She was now in the daylight hours with a missing child. She had to do something. She could not just keep him. She brought him a plate with 2 pieces of toast, cut into triangles. He ate slowly, carefully. "I need to know your name, sweetie," she said, sitting on the coffee table across from him. "Can you tell me your name?" He looked down at his toast. He swallowed, then, so quietly she almost missed it, he whispered, "Leo." Lena's heart leaped. "Leo? That is a beautiful name." He looked up at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "I am Lena," she said, pointing to herself, "and you are Leo." A tiny ghost of a smile touched his bruised lips before vanishing. It was a start, but the bruises were the problem. They looked worse in the daylight, a sickening map of purple and yellow spreading across his cheek and ribs. She could not call the police. Not now. They would take him, put him in the system, and she would never know if he was safe. The system. Lena shuddered at the thought. She had to make sure he was not seriously hurt. "Okay, Leo," she said, forcing a cheerful tone. "We're going to take a little trip. I'm going to tell everyone you are my nephew. We are just going to get you checked out. Make sure none of those bruises are too bad." She dressed him in the same clothes from last night, now clean and dry. She put on her own uniform, grabbed her keys, and took his small hand in hers. He did not pull away. She took him to a small community clinic in a different neighborhood. Far from her apartment, she paid the $20 copay in cash, filling out the forms with her own information and listing Leo as her nephew. The lie felt thick in her throat. A nurse with kind eyes and graying hair named Martha called them back. "And what happened to you, young man?" Martha asked gently as she took Leo's temperature. He fell. Lena jumped in, her voice too quick. "At the park, down a whole flight of those big, concrete stairs." Martha nodded, her expression unreadable. "I see." She gently lifted Leo's shirt to examine his ribs. Her smile faded. Her eyes met Lena's over Leo's head. "These are some significant injuries. For a fall." "He fell hard," Lena insisted, her palms sweating. "I'm sure," Martha said, her tone neutral. She finished her examination, gave Leo a sticker, and told them to wait for the doctor. As soon as she left the room, Lena saw her through the crack in the door, picking up the phone at the nurse's station. She was not calling a doctor. She was speaking quietly, her back to them. Lena did not need to hear the words. She knew. The nurse was reporting them. Lena's panic spiked. They had to leave. When the nurse returned, Lena had already helped Leo put his shirt back on. "You know what? I just remembered I left the stove on. We have to go, right now." "Ma'am, the doctor will be right in. You need to wait." "We cannot." "I am so sorry." Lena grabbed Leo's hand and hurried out of the clinic, ignoring the nurse's call to stop. That night, Lena could not sleep. The near miss at the clinic had terrified her. She lay in bed, watching the slow rise and fall of Leo's back as he slept on the couch. Her exhaustion finally pulled her under, but her sleep was not restful. It was filled with dreams, flashes of her own past, vivid and unwanted. She was 8 years old, standing in a sterile white room. A social worker with a tight bun and a clipboard was talking. "Lena, this is the Millers. They are going to be your new foster family. Be a good girl." Then another flash. She was 12, sitting at a long dinner table, invisible. The foster father's voice. "You are lucky to have a roof over your head and food on this table. Lena, don't you dare ask for more. You are not our real daughter." Another. She was 16, packing her few belongings into a black trash bag. She'd been left behind again. Another family deciding she was not worth the trouble. The constant crushing feeling of being unwanted, of being a burden no one would ever choose. Lena woke with a gasp, her cheeks wet with tears. The ache in her chest was so familiar it was almost comforting. She looked over at Leo, sleeping soundly on her couch. He was just like her, lost, abandoned, and hurt by a world that should have protected him. Her resolve hardened into something unbreakable. The fear she felt at the clinic, the fear of getting caught, it all evaporated, replaced by a fierce, protective certainty. She was not just helping him, she was protecting him. She would not let the system get him. She would not let him be left behind. She got up and checked the locks on her door for the 3rd time. As she turned away, a movement on the street below caught her eye. She peeked through the gap in her curtains. The street was empty, save for a single, gleaming black sports utility vehicle. It was an expensive model, the kind that never, ever came through this neighborhood. Its windows were tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. It was cruising slowly, too slowly, past her building. It stopped at the end of the block, the engine idling, a cloud of white exhaust pluming in the cold air. A chill ran down Lena's spine, one that had nothing to do with the draft from the window. The SUV sat there for a full minute, then its headlights flashed once, and it slowly pulled away, turning the corner and disappearing. Lena let the curtain fall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She told herself it was nothing, a coincidence, someone lost. But as she looked at the sleeping boy on her couch, a new, cold dread began to settle in. She had a terrible feeling that she had not just saved a lost child, she had stolen something, and someone was looking for him. The shift had been grueling. 10 hours of slinging hash, refilling coffee cups, and smiling until her face felt like a cracked mask. Lena trudged up the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, her feet leaden, her mind numb. All she could think about was Leo. Had he been okay? She had left him with strict instructions to bolt all 3 locks and not open the door for anyone. She had set him up on the couch with her small, flickering television, a stack of crackers, and 2 juice boxes she had bought with her tip money. Leaving him alone felt like leaving a piece of her own heart on the line, but she had no choice. Rent was due in 3 days. She fumbled for her keys, her fingers stiff. As she reached the landing, she stopped breathing. The door was open. It was just a crack, a sliver of darkness, but the heavy-duty deadbolt she had meticulously locked was splintered. The wood around the latch was fractured. No. The word was a dry whisper. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She shoved the door open, the wood scraping against the floor. Leo? The apartment was a wreck, not a violent wreck, but a precise, thorough one. Her drawers were pulled out, their contents neatly piled. Her mattress was shifted off its cheap metal frame. The cushions of the couch were on the floor, but Leo was there. He was huddled in the small space between the bathtub and the wall, the same place he had stood just 2 nights ago. He was trembling, his face paper white, but he was unharmed. A wave of relief so profound it made her knees buckle washed over her. She stumbled toward him, dropping her keys and purse. Leo, oh my God, are you okay? Did they hurt you? He shook his head, his eyes wide with the familiar terror she had seen in the alley. He pointed a small, shaking finger toward the door. Lena spun around, her heart jumping back into her throat. A heavy, measured knock echoed through the room. It was not a question. It was a statement. Lena's blood ran cold. She slowly stood, moving to put her own body between the bathroom and the front door. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling. The door pushed open slowly. 2 men stood in the threshold, filling the narrow space. They were not the kind of men who belonged in this building. They wore immaculate black suits, tailored to perfection. Their shoes were polished to a mirror shine. One was broad and dark, the other was thinner, paler, with eyes that seemed to look right through her. "Miss Brooks," the pale one said. His voice was calm, almost polite. It made him more terrifying. "We are here for the boy." Lena's protective instinct, the one that had been forged in her own childhood of foster homes and neglect, flared into a hot, bright rage. "I do not know who you are," she said, grabbing the useless, splintered edge of her door. "Get out of my apartment or I will scream." The broad one chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "She'll scream. Cute. The boy does not belong to you," the pale one continued, taking a step inside. Lena flinched back. "He was reported missing 2 days ago. We are here to take him home." "Home? Who are you? Where is his mother? Do you have proof?" Lena rattled off the questions, her voice gaining strength even as her hands shook. "He was hurt, bruised. I am not letting him go with anyone until I see a police officer, until I know he is safe." The pale man sighed, a sound of genuine boredom. He looked at his partner. "Marco, handle this." Marco cracked his thick knuckles and took a step forward. Lena grabbed the heaviest thing she could reach, the chipped ceramic lamp on her end table, and held it up like a club. "I mean it! Get out!" "That will not be necessary." The voice came from the hallway. It was deep, resonant, and coated in ice. It carried an authority that made the air in the room thicken. The 2 men, Marco and the pale one, immediately stiffened and stepped back, parting as if by invisible strings. A 3rd man appeared in the doorway. He was tall, broader than Marco, but carrying none of his brutish weight. He was built with a lean, lethal grace. His suit was not just expensive, it was a work of art, a dark charcoal wool that draped perfectly over his shoulders. His black hair was meticulously styled, and his face was angular and handsome, like a Roman statue, But his eyes were the color of a frozen lake, and they were burning with a rage so cold it felt like it could shatter glass. This was not a man who knocked. This was a man who owned the buildings that others knocked on. He stood there for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over the tiny, squalid apartment, his lip curling in faint, unconscious disgust. Then his eyes landed on Leo, who was peering out from behind the bathroom doorframe. The man's entire demeanor shifted, the cold rage intensified, but it was now laced with something else, a possessive, raw relief. He did not move, did not speak. He just stared at his son. Then, slowly, he turned his head, and those frozen eyes landed on Lena. He looked at her, at her cheap, grease-stained uniform, at the pathetic lamp clutched in her hand. He interrogated her, judged her, and dismissed her, all in one silent, terrifying glance. A small sound broke the spell. "Papa?" Leo stepped out from the bathroom, his small body trembling. He took one hesitant step, then another, and then he ran. He slammed into the tall man's legs, clutching the fine wool of his trousers. The man's hand, large and scarred on the knuckles, came down to rest on Leo's head, his shoulders, which had been rigid with tension, lowered by a fraction. He had found what he was looking for. Dante Moretti looked down at his son. Then Leo did something unexpected. He did not burrow in. He turned, his small hand still clutching his father's trousers, and looked back at Lena, who stood frozen by the lamp. He hesitated, torn between the woman who had saved him and the man who was his entire world. "Don't be mad at her," Leo whispered, his voice tiny and hoarse. "She was nice. She gave me soup." Dante's gaze snapped back to Lena. The dismissal was gone, replaced by a flicker of sharp, assessing curiosity. He had been prepared for a kidnapper, a rival, an opportunist. He was not prepared for this. "Who are you?" he demanded. His voice was a low growl, meant to intimidate, to command. Lena, however, had just had her door kicked in, her apartment tossed, and the one thing she cared about threatened. Her fear was eclipsed by her anger. "My name is Lena Brooks," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. She finally set the lamp down. "And who are you? You cannot just break into my home." Dante's eyebrow raised. He was not used to being questioned by anyone, let alone a waitress in a fourth-floor walk-up. The pale man, still by the door, seemed to hold his breath. "You took my son," Dante stated. It was an accusation. "I saved your son." Lena shot back, her voice rising. "I found him in an alley behind my diner. He was bruised, half frozen, and starving. I called the police. They said it would be hours. Hours. He would have died. What was I supposed to do? Leave him in the garbage?" She advanced a step, fueled by adrenaline and a sudden, reckless disregard for her own safety. "I took him home. I cleaned him up. I fed him. I took him to a clinic this morning to get his ribs checked, and they treated me like a criminal. I did what any decent human being would do. Maybe you should be asking who hurt him and left him there, instead of interrogating me." Silence. Dante studied her. He saw the genuine fire in her eyes, the dark circles of exhaustion under them, the protective stance she still held. She was not lying. She was terrified, but she was telling the truth, and she was not backing down. This was not what he had expected. His fury, which had been a white-hot furnace, settled into something else, a deep, unsettling intrigue. "Pack his things," Dante said, his voice flat. Lena bristled. "He does not have any things, just the clothes he was wearing, which I washed." "Then get them." Lena looked at Leo, then at Dante, then at the two stone-faced men by the door. This was not a request. She had lost, but she would not do it with them watching. "Wait outside," she said, pointing to the hallway. The pale man looked at Dante, waiting for the command to laugh or to grab her. But Dante just held her gaze for a beat longer. He saw her defiance, her vulnerability, and her absolute sincerity. Without a word, he turned, put a hand on Leo's back, and guided him into the hallway. The two other men followed, pulling the broken door shut behind them, leaving Lena alone in her wrecked apartment. Lena leaned against the wall, her legs finally giving out. She slid to the floor, her body overcome with tremors. She had stared down the devil, and he had blinked. She took a deep breath, pushed herself up, and went to her bedroom. She grabbed a plastic grocery bag. Into it, she folded the t-shirt and sweatpants he had slept in. She went to the kitchenette and added the now empty box of apple juice and the half sleeve of crackers. It was a pathetic collection, a testament to her poverty. She opened the door. Dante was standing right there, his back to her. Leo was holding his hand, half hidden behind his leg. "Here," Lena said, her voice thick. She held out the plastic bag. Dante turned and looked at the bag, then at her. He made no move to take it. Marco, the broad one, stepped forward and took it from her, holding it as if it were contaminated. "Leo," Lena knelt, ignoring the men. Her heart felt like it was cracking. "You be a good boy for your papa, okay?" Leo let go of his father's hand and stepped toward her. He put his small, clean arms around her neck and hugged her tightly. Lena buried her face in his hair, breathing in the scent of her own mint shampoo. "Can you visit me?" Leo whispered into her ear. Lena's eyes squeezed shut. "I do not think so, sweetie." "Papa?" Leo pulled back and looked at his father. "Can she visit? I want her to—" Dante's expression was unreadable. He looked at his son, whose eyes were pleading, and then at Lena, whose face was streaked with tears she was too proud to wipe away. His son, raised to be tough, to show no weakness, was openly displaying attachment to this woman. Dante gave a single, curt nod. It was not a promise, but it was not a no. Dante gently detached Leo from Lena. "We are leaving." He scooped Leo up in one arm, settling him against his hip. Leo, sensing the finality, buried his face in his father's expensive suit. Dante turned and walked away. His men followed, a silent, deadly procession. Lena stood in her broken doorway and watched them go, the sound of their expensive shoes on the linoleum fading until she was left alone in the wreckage of her apartment. She closed the door, or what was left of it, and slid the deadbolt into the splintered frame. It held, but just barely. That night, Lena could not sleep. The apartment was too quiet, too empty. The indentation of Leo's small body was still on the couch cushions. The chipped mug he had used for his soup was in the sink. She felt heartbroken. Ripped open, she had spent her entire life being the one left behind. Now, she understood the other side of it, the pain of being the one to let go. Across town, in the penthouse, Dante Moretti watched his son sleep. A private doctor had checked him over, confirming the bruised ribs and superficial cuts. He was safe. He was home. Dante stood by the window, the city lights of Ravenshade twinkling below him like a field of scattered diamonds. His rage had returned, but it was cold now, focused. Someone had breached his fortress. Someone had touched his son. He picked up his phone. "Marco," he said, his voice low. "Boss, I want a full background check on the woman, Lena Brooks. I want to know where she was born, every school she attended, every job she has ever had. I want to know who her parents were, who her friends are, and what she ate for breakfast this morning. I want to know everything by morning." He hung up. He looked back at his son, who stirred, murmuring in his sleep. The next day, Lena woke up feeling hollowed out. She had propped a chair against her door, but she had barely slept. She had to go to work. She had to pretend her life had not been turned upside down by a small, bruised boy and the most dangerous man she had ever seen. She opened her door, the chair scraping against the floor, and froze. Blocking her entryway was a box, a very large, very expensive-looking black box. She looked down the hall. It was empty. Hesitantly, she nudged the box inside and closed her door. It was from a high-end florist, the kind she had only ever seen in magazines. There was no name, just a thick, cream-colored card resting on top. She opened the card. The handwriting inside was strong, sharp, and black. He spoke your name in his sleep. D. Lena lifted the lid. The box was filled with dark red roses. They were not the bright, cheerful red of Valentine's Day. They were a deep, velvety crimson, the color of blood, so dark they were almost black. There must have been 36 of them. Their heavy, rich scent filled her tiny apartment, a beautiful, terrifying invasion. The roses were dying. The 36 velvety, blood-red flowers that had been delivered in a box large enough to hold a child now filled her small apartment with the heavy, sweet, funereal smell of decay. Lena had no vase large enough, so they were crowded into her soup pot and every chipped mug she owned. A constant, fragrant reminder of the world she had accidentally touched. 2 days had passed since Leo had been taken. 2 days of her staring at the new, cheap deadbolt Sal from the diner had helped her install. 2 days of her heart lurching every time a car slowed on the street below. She was coming home from her shift, her tips barely totaling $20. When she saw him, he was standing by the graffiti-covered entrance to her building, as out of place as the roses had been. It was the pale man, the one with the dead eyes, from her apartment. He was in a different suit, this one a sharp, funereal black. He held a thick, cream-colored envelope in his hand. Lena froze at the end of the sidewalk. Her first instinct was to run. "Miss Brooks," he called out. His voice was smooth, carrying easily in the cold evening air. He did not move toward her, just waited. She walked forward slowly, clutching her thin coat. "What do you want?" "Mister, Moretti wishes to express his gratitude." He held out the envelope. Lena looked at it. It was thick with cash, enough to pay her rent for a year. Probably, enough to fix her broken door properly, enough to buy her a new life. "I do not want it," she said, her voice hoarse. The man's pale eyebrow twitched, the first sign of expression she had ever seen from him. "I beg your pardon. I said I do not want it." Lena's voice grew stronger. She met his gaze. "I did not save that boy for a paycheck. You cannot buy me. Tell your boss to leave me alone." She pushed past him, her shoulder brushing his expensive wool suit, and fumbled for her keys. She heard him, still standing on the sidewalk, not moving. He did not try to stop her. She locked all 3 bolts, her heart hammering. She had just refused Dante Moretti. Her phone rang an hour later. It was an unknown number, the same one that had been burning a hole in her call history since that night. She had saved it, though she did not know why. She answered, her hand shaking. "Hello? You refused my gratitude." Dante Moretti's voice. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, laced with a cold, sharp curiosity. He did not sound angry. He sounded intrigued. "It was not gratitude," Elena said, her throat dry. "It was a payment, and I am not for sale." Silence stretched over the line. She could hear him breathing, a slow, controlled sound. "You have a sharp tongue. Lena Brooks," he said. The first time he had used her name, it sounded strange in his mouth. Possessive. Most people are not so brave, or so foolish. "I am just tired. What do you want from me?" "I'm having dinner tomorrow night. At 8 o'clock, a car will be waiting for you outside your building. I cannot, I have to work." "You will not be working tomorrow," he said, a note of finality in his voice. It was not a request. He hung up. Lena sank onto her couch, the smell of the dying roses choking her. She was terrified of him, of what he represented, but a different, smaller part of her, a part she hated, was just as terrified that she would never see Leo again. This was the only way. The car that arrived was not the black SUV she had seen from her window. It was a classic Bentley, gleaming and black. So quiet it seemed to coast on air. A driver held the door for her. She had worn her only nice dress, a dark blue wrap dress she had found at a second-hand store for $10. She had scrubbed her nails, tied her hair back, and felt like a child playing dress-up. The restaurant was called Il Corvo. It had no sign, just a heavy, carved wooden door on a quiet, cobblestone street. The inside was dark, filled with old wood, white tablecloths, and the quiet clink of heavy silver. The air smelled of wine and old money. Dante was already there, at a secluded booth in the back. He stood as she approached. It was a small gesture of old-world courtesy, and it threw her off balance more than any threat could have. "Lena," he said, nodding. He was even more imposing outside of her tiny apartment. He wore a suit that probably cost more than she made in a year, and he fit this place in a way she never would. She slid into the booth. A waiter instantly appeared, pouring water into her glass. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, just to break the silence. "You did not have a choice," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. He had not looked at the menu. He did not need to. "What is this?" she asked. "First you send your man with money, now a fancy dinner. Is this part 2 of the interrogation?" A flicker of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps. I had you investigated." Lena's blood went cold. "You... what?" "A full background check. I know you were a ward of the state. I know you bounced between 12 different foster homes in 14 years. I know you have no family, no connections, and $312 in your bank account." Lena felt stripped bare, violated. "You had no right. I have every right when it comes to my son." "I needed to know who he was with. And what did you find out?" she snapped, her fear replaced by a sudden, hot anger. "Did your report tell you I am a kidnapper, a terrorist, or just a waitress who could not leave a child in an alley to freeze?" He watched her, his expression unreadable. "It told me you are precisely what you appear to be. Someone who has been left behind, over and over. Someone who knows what it is to be unwanted." His words hit her like a physical blow. She recoiled, the anger draining out of her, leaving her feeling exposed and raw. "You are right," she whispered, looking down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "I know exactly what that feels like, and I saw it in his eyes, that same look. He was terrified, but mostly he just looked alone. I could not stand it. I would not do that to a dog, let alone a child. So, no, I do not want your money. I do not want your fancy dinner. I just wanted him to be safe." She finally looked up, meeting his gaze. "Is he safe? Mr. Moretti? Is he okay?" The atmosphere in the booth shifted, the cold, assessing light in his eyes softened, replaced by something else. The sharp edge of his interrogation was gone. He was not looking at a problem anymore. He was looking at her. "He is safe," Dante said, his voice quieter now. "He asks about you." Lena's heart gave a painful lurch. "He does? He told me you gave him soup and washed his hair. He said you smelled like mint." Dante leaned forward just slightly. A quiet, mutual fascination began to simmer between them, a dangerous current under the surface. "He is a quiet boy. He has been since his mother died. He does not attach to people. But he attached to you in less than 2 days. I need to understand why." "Because I did not want anything from him," Lena said simply. "I just saw him." Dante held her gaze for a long time, as if he were trying to see inside her, to find the angle, the lie. He found none. He ordered for them both, rich pastas and dark wine she had never heard of, and as they ate, he stopped interrogating her. He simply talked. He asked her about the diner, about the city, and he listened. She found herself talking, her nervousness fading, replaced by the simple, intoxicating feeling of being seen, of being heard. When the dinner was over, he offered his driver. "He will take you home." "No," Lena said, her old stubborn pride resurfacing. She needed to stand on her own feet to prove she was not one of his possessions. "I can get a cab. I will be fine." Dante looked as if he was about to argue, but then he nodded slowly. "As you wish." He walked her to the heavy wooden door. "Lena," she turned. "You did a good thing," he said. "My son is alive because of you. That is a debt I will not forget." Lena hailed a cab, her mind reeling. The man was a contradiction, a cold-blooded killer who was also a grieving father, a tyrant who showed surprising moments of tenderness. She got into the back of the yellow taxi, her head swimming from the wine and the intensity of the evening. They were 3 blocks from her apartment when it happened. A black sedan, a different one, not the Bentley, suddenly swerved in front of them, cutting the cab off. The driver slammed on his brakes, and Lena was thrown forward, catching herself on the plastic partition. Another car, an identical sedan, screeched to a halt behind them, boxing them in. "Oh, God! Oh, God!" the cab driver whispered, his hands visibly shaking on the wheel. "I do not have any money, I swear." The back door of the cab was wrenched open. A man got in, sliding onto the seat next to Lena. He was not wearing a suit. He was dressed in a leather jacket, and he smelled of stale cigarettes and something metallic, like old pennies. "Lena Brooks," he said, his voice a gravelly sneer. "You are the little bird who found the Moretti kid. Quite the hero." Lena was pressed against the far door, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. "I do not know what you are talking about. Please, just take my purse. We do not want your purse." He laughed, a short, ugly bark. He turned to face her, and she saw a long, jagged scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "We just have a message for you, from our friends. You are getting too close to the Morettis. It is bad for your health." He leaned in, and Lena flinched. "He makes you a target. He's poison. You understand? Everything he touches rots. You stay away from Dante Moretti. You stay away from his kid. This is your only warning." He opened the door and got out. In seconds. Both black cars were gone, their tires squealing as they turned the corner. Lena and the cab driver sat in silence, the sound of the idling engine deafening. "Go," Lena whispered. "Just go." Where? Lady? She could not go home. What if they were waiting? She looked down at her phone, at the unknown number she had called earlier. Her fingers, shaking so badly she could barely type, hit call. It rang only once. "Yes." Dante's voice, clipped and alert. They stopped my cab." Lena stammered, tears choking her. "A black car. 2 of them. A man with a scar. He got in. He threatened me. He said to stay away from you." "Where are you?" Dante's voice was no longer calm. It was a low, vibrating instrument of pure, controlled rage. She gave him the cross street, her voice breaking. "Stay in the cab. Lock the doors. Do not move," he commanded. "I am on my way." It was not minutes. It felt like seconds. A different car, a low-slung, dark gray Aston Martin, roared down the street the wrong way and screeched to a halt in front of the taxi. Dante got out. He was not the composed man from the restaurant. His suit jacket was off, his tie was gone, and his eyes were black with a fury that was terrifying to behold. He yanked the cab door open and his gaze raked over her, sharp and assessing. "Did they touch you?" Lena shook her head, unable to speak. "Did they put their hands on you?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. No. He talked." Dante's hands were on her, checking her arms, his jaw set in a hard line. His touch was not gentle, but it was not rough. It was urgent, a physical inventory of her safety. "You are all right." He threw a wad of cash at the cab driver. "Forget you saw this." He practically lifted Lena from the cab and put her into the passenger seat of his car. He got in, his movements precise and angry, and sped off into the night. "You cannot go back to your apartment," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "It is not safe. They know where you live." "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Somewhere you will be." He took her to a glass tower downtown, a high-end condominium that looked sterile and anonymous. He led her to a penthouse unit, unlocking the door. The apartment was pristine, minimalist, and looked as if no one had ever lived there. A safe house. "Lena?" A small voice came from the hallway. Lena turned. Leo was standing there in superhero pajamas, rubbing his eyes, his face lit up. "Lena!" He ran to her, slamming into her legs and hugging her tight. Lena's adrenaline and terror finally broke. She knelt, wrapped her arms around his small, warm body, and burst into tears, burying her face in his hair. Dante stood in the doorway, watching them. He saw his son, who had been morose and silent, now beaming, clinging to this woman as if she were a lifeline. His expression was a complex mask of anger, gratitude, and a strange, unwelcome tenderness. Later, after Leo was back asleep in one of the sterile bedrooms, Lena was in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot tea Dante had pressed into them. She was still shaking. He came into the kitchen, the dim light from under the cabinets casting long shadows. He had shed his jacket, and his white shirt was rolled up at the forearms, revealing strong, lightly tanned skin. "They will not find you here," he said, his voice quiet again, the rage banked. "He said you were poison," Lena whispered, staring into the mug. "He said you rot everything you touch." Dante was silent for a long moment. He leaned against the opposite counter, crossing his arms. "They are not wrong." His honesty startled her. She looked up. "You are in danger because of me," he said, his eyes holding hers. "Because you did something decent in a world that is not. I brought this to your door." He pushed off the counter and took a step toward her. He was close now, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne and the wine from dinner. He reached up, his hand moving slowly as if not to startle her. He brushed his thumb over her cheek, wiping away a tear she had not known had fallen. His skin was calloused, rough against her. The contact was electric, a jolt that went straight through her. "You should be terrified of me," he whispered. "I am," she breathed. His gaze dropped to her mouth. The air in the kitchen became thick, charged. He was so close. The distance between them was suddenly intimate, unbearable. He leaned in. Lena's breath hitched. Her eyes fluttered, but she did not pull back. She was terrified. Yes, but she was also drawn to him, to the danger and the safety he represented all at once. His lips were a fraction of an inch from hers. She could feel the warmth of his breath, could see the dark intensity in his eyes. Then he stopped. He froze, his jaw tightening. A war was happening behind his eyes. With a ragged breath, he pulled back, just an inch, but it felt like a mile. "I cannot," he growled, the words rough. He was not ready to pull her into his world. She was not ready to be pulled. He looked at her one last time, his hand dropping from her face, leaving her skin tingling. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Lena standing alone in the dim light, her heart hammering against her ribs, her lips still burning from the kiss that had almost been. The safe house had been a sterile, temporary purgatory, her apartment. When Dante's men had finally cleared it, had felt violated and cold. But the penthouse, where she now visited Leo 3 times a week, was something else entirely. It was a fortress of glass and steel, high above the grit of Ravenshade, a place so clean and quiet it felt like it existed in a different atmosphere. Leo was, as Dante had noted, a different child in her presence. The silent, haunted boy from the alley was gone, replaced by a shy, bright 7-year-old who loved to draw. "This is the greasy spoon," Leo explained, his crayon scraping vigorously against the thick paper. He drew a lopsided square with a stick figure inside. "And that's you. You're giving me the soup." "You remember that?" Lena asked, her voice soft. They were sitting on the plush white carpet of the penthouse living room, a box of art supplies spread between them. "It was the best soup," Leo said, deadly serious. Lena smiled, a real, unguarded smile. From the doorway, Dante watched them. He did this often, standing just out of sight, observing. He was a creature of shadows, and she was a splash of unwanted, confusing light in his home. She had been visiting for 2 weeks, always supervised, always with the silent, pale man, Silvio, or the broad-shouldered Marco hovering nearby. But today, Dante was home. His attraction to her was a problem. It was a strategic flaw, a weakness he could not afford. He watched her tuck her hair behind her ear, her movements simple and unstudied. She was nothing like the women in his world. She was not polished, not calculating. She was just real. Her simple presence soothed his son in a way his millions, his power, and his army of men never could, and that made her the most dangerous thing in his life. He kept his grip on control, reminding himself that his world was acid. It would dissolve someone like her. He had seen it happen before, after Leo was taken to bed by his nanny. Dante stepped into the room. Lena immediately tensed, rising to her feet and gathering the crayons. "You are good with him," Dante said. It was not a compliment, it was an observation. "He's a good kid," Lena replied, not looking at him. "He just needs someone to listen. His private academy is looking for a new art instructor," Dante said, his tone casual. Lena froze, her hands full of crayons. "What?" "The position is part-time, 3 days a week. The salary is more than you make in 6 months at the diner." Lena slowly turned to face him. Her mind reeled. This was not a job offer. This was a leash, a beautiful silken leash. "Dante, I cannot." "Why not? You are qualified. My team's report said you have an associate's degree in fine art from the community college." "That is not the point," she said, her voice strained. "Working at his school. That is different from visiting. That is, being in your world. I saw what happened last time. I cannot." He took a step closer. The air crackled. "You were in danger because you were an unknown quantity, a loose end. If you are part of my son's life, in an official capacity, you are under my protection, explicitly. No one would dare touch you." His promise of safety sounded exactly like a threat. She looked away, toward the hallway where Leo had disappeared. This job meant she could see him every day. It meant she could afford rent and food without killing herself in 10-hour double shifts. It meant stability she had only ever dreamed of. But it meant being owned. "I would be your employee," she stated. Testing the word, "You would be Leo's teacher," he corrected, though they both knew it was the same thing. She looked at him, her chin high. "If I do this, I do it for him, not for you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Accepted." The next week, Lena started her new life. She quit the greasy spoon, trading the smell of old coffee for the scent of tempera paint and chalk. The children at the Raven Shade Academy were polite, privileged, and a little sterile. But Leo's face when he saw her in the art room, his quiet, proud, "That's my Lena," made the golden cage feel, for a moment, like a home. She was careful to keep her distance from Dante. She was an employee. She saw him only when he picked Leo up, a polite nod, a brief report on Leo's day. He let it go on for 2 weeks. Then, one evening, as she was cleaning her classroom, he appeared in the doorway. "I'm making dinner tonight," he said. "Oh, that is nice. But I should get home. It is not an invitation for another time. Lena, it is for tonight, at my penthouse, 8 o'clock. He did not wait for an answer, just turned and left. She arrived at 8, driven by one of Dante's silent men. The penthouse was different. The lights were dim, soft. Classical music was playing. Leo was not there. He was spending the night with his paternal grandmother. They were alone. Dante was in the kitchen, his suit jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He was standing over a pot, stirring. The sight was so incongruously domestic it stole her breath. "You cook?" she asked. "My wife, my late wife, Isabella. She loved ossobuco. She taught me." He looked into the pot, but his mind was far away. He served her at the massive dining table overlooking the city. This time, he was not the inquisitor. He was vulnerable. "She was not like me," he said quietly, swirling the dark red wine in his glass. "She came from this world. She understood the rules. She knew what I was, and she accepted it." "What happened to her?" Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dante's eyes met hers. The coldness was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient ache. "She got sick. A cancer that moved too fast. It was the one thing in this world my money could not stop, and my guns could not kill." He spoke of the helplessness, of watching the strongest person he knew fade. He spoke of Leo, who'd been 4 years old, and how he had retreated into silence after she was gone. "He has not been the same since," Dante said, his voice rough, "until you woke him up." The conversation turned tender. They talked about her past, the foster homes, the feeling of never being permanent. He listened, his focus absolute. For the first time, Lena felt like she was not just a waitress, not just a project, but a person he genuinely wanted to understand. It grew late. The wine was gone. The music had long since faded. "I should go," Lena said, standing up. The silence in the apartment was heavy, intimate. She walked to the kitchen to place her glass in the sink. She felt him come up behind her. She did not turn around. "Lena?" She stopped, her back to him. "Do not go." She turned slowly. He was standing only a foot away, his face a mask of conflict. The air between them was so thick she could barely breathe. "Dante, I cannot." "I know." He took a step. He was in her space now. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. He raised a hand, not to touch her, but as if memorizing the shape of her face. She made to leave, a small, involuntary step back. He caught her wrist. His grip was not rough, but it was firm. An anchor. "Please?" she whispered. "I know this is madness," he breathed, his voice a low growl. "I know I am poison, just like they said." He did not release her wrist. Instead, he used it to gently pull her closer. His other hand came up, his fingers brushing the hair from her cheek, then settling on her jaw. His thumb grazed her lower lip. "But I do not think I care." He lowered his head. The kiss was slow. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of a cheap romance. It was intentional. It was an exploration. His lips were firm, tasting of wine and a dangerous, controlled heat. He was not taking. He was asking. And his touch was so careful. She felt as if she were made of spun glass. A small sound, a sigh or a sob, escaped her throat. She melted against him. Her fear dissolved, replaced by a wave of heat that started in her stomach and spread through her entire body. Her hands, which had been frozen at her sides, came up to rest on his chest. She could feel the steady, hard beat of his heart under her palms. She returned his kiss, tentatively at first, then with a matching, desperate need. His control snapped, a low growl rumbled in his chest. His hand left her jaw, tangled in her hair, tilting her head back. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, demanding. He explored her mouth, and she met his intensity. Her body arching against his, he backed her up, step by step, until the back of her legs hit the cold marble of the kitchen counter. Without breaking the kiss, he gripped her waist, his fingers digging into her hips, and lifted her. She gasped as he set her on the counter, positioning himself between her legs. The height difference was gone. They were eye to eye, mouth to mouth. His breathing was ragged. He tore his lips from hers, pressing them against the sensitive skin of her jaw, her throat. "Lena," he growled, the name a prayer. His hands slid from her waist, moving upward. He bunched the fabric of her simple cotton shirt in his fists, then slid his hands underneath. His palms were hot and rough against the soft skin of her ribs. The shock of his touch on her bare skin made her arch back, a silent gasp escaping her. He explored the curve of her waist, his thumbs tracing her ribs, his hands splaying across her back. He pulled her flush against him, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, holding on as if she were drowning. He kissed her again, deeply. His control fraying, she felt him trembling, not with weakness, but with a barely leashed power. And then, just as the fire threatened to consume them both, he tore himself away. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His breathing was a harsh, ragged sound in the silent kitchen. His eyes were closed, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "Dante?" she whispered, her voice shaky, her body thrumming. "Not like this," he forced out, the words rough. He opened his eyes. They were dark with a desire that stunned her, but they were also clear, not rushed, not unearned. He gently unwrapped her legs from his waist. He smoothed her shirt down, his hands shaking slightly. The act was more intimate than the kiss itself. He took a step back, putting a torturous foot of distance between them. "I will have Marco drive you home." Lena, her lips swollen, her body aching, could only nod. The next morning, she walked toward the academy, her mind a fog. The world felt unreal. The kiss replayed in her mind, the heat, the control, the way he had pulled back. She was 2 blocks from the academy, walking down a street lined with oak trees, when she felt it, the prickle on the back of her neck. She glanced over her shoulder. A dark green sedan was cruising slowly, too slowly, about 30 yards behind her. Her blood went cold. It was not Dante's. She sped up, her heart hammering. She turned the corner. The sedan turned the corner. She ducked into a small alleyway, a shortcut she sometimes took, a dead end. She pressed her back against the brick, her breath catching in her throat. The green sedan stopped at the mouth of the alley, blocking the only exit. 2 men got out. They were not dressed in suits. They were rough, smiling. "Look what we found," one of them said, his voice oily. "Mr. Moretti's little pet." Before Lena could even scream, a black Escalade roared from the opposite direction, mounting the curb and slamming to a halt, blocking the green sedan. The doors flew open. Marco and Silvio got out. It was not a fight. It was an execution. It was brutal, fast, and terrifyingly quiet. Lena did not see weapons, only a flurry of precise, violent movements. In less than 10 seconds, the two men from the sedan were on the ground, and Silvio was calmly checking one of them for a pulse. Marco turned, his face impassive. He opened the back door of the Escalade. "Miss Brooks, Mr. Moretti wants to see you. Now." She was driven to the penthouse, her body shaking so violently she could barely walk. They bypassed the living area, taking her directly to Dante's office. He was not sitting. He was pacing in front of his wall of windows, a caged panther. When he saw her, his face was a mask of such cold, lethal fury that she almost took a step back. "They followed you to work," he stated. His voice was dangerously quiet. Dante, I am okay. Your men." He slammed his fist onto his heavy oak desk. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot, making her jump. "You are not okay," he roared, his control shattering. "This is a new crew. Ndrangheta cell. They think they can get to me by putting their filthy hands on what is mine." His gaze locked on her, and his fury was so potent it was a physical force. It was not directed at her. It was for her. It was the rage of a possessive, territorial predator. "They put a target on you, Lena, because of me." "So what do I do?" she demanded, her fear finally giving way to a spine of her own. "Do I hide in this penthouse forever? Do I quit the job? I will not be your prisoner." "Dante, I cannot." He stopped pacing. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling. He was torn, the man of cold logic warring with the raw, primal emotion she evoked in him. He saw her defiance, her refusal to be broken, her strength, and it only made him want her more. He walked toward her, his eyes black. "Then I'll burn their entire house down." The calm at the Ravenshade Academy was a thin, fragile veneer. Lena knew this, but she allowed herself to sink into the normalcy of it. She was cleaning paintbrushes in the art room, the afternoon sun slanting through the high windows. When her phone buzzed, it was not her cheap burner. It was the new, encrypted phone Dante had insisted she carry. She answered. It was Silvio, the pale, quiet one. His voice, usually so devoid of emotion, was cracked. "He is gone." Lena's blood turned to ice. "What, Silvio? What are you talking about?" "Leo, they breached the south gate. A diversion. Marco's men were pulled away for less than 2 minutes. When they got back, the car was empty. He is gone." The paintbrush clattered from her hand into the metal sink. No, not again. Dante's world did not just erupt. It imploded. By the time she was brought to the penthouse, less a home, now, than a war room, the place was swarming. Men in dark suits spoke into encrypted phones, their voices low and urgent. Dante stood in the center of it all, not moving, a statue of pure, condensed fury. He was staring at a security feed on his massive television, watching the grainy, black and white footage of a black van speeding away from the academy. "Find the Ndrangheta cell," Dante said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I want the head of every man who was on that detail. I want the family of the man who planned this. I want them all." Lena stood in the doorway, shaking. This was her fault. The men who had followed her, the ones who had targeted her. This was the escalation. She had brought this. The rival's words echoed in her head. Everything he touches rots. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to think. Dante was mobilizing his army, focused on brute force, on the enemy he knew. But Lena's mind went somewhere else, to the art room. "Dante," she said, her voice small. He ignored her, barking an order at Marco. "Dante," she said, louder this time, walking into the center of the room. He turned, his eyes black, unseeing. "Not now, Lena. It was not them," she said, her voice trembling but gaining conviction. "Not just them. Leo. He has been drawing something all week. I thought it was just a drawing." "A drawing?" Dante's voice was dismissive, laced with contempt. "I am in the middle of a war, and you are talking about crayons." "A van," Lena pushed, ignoring the sting. "A specific one." He kept drawing it, a white van, a delivery van. He said it was scary. It had a picture on the side, a snake, eating its own tail. Silvio, who had been listening, looked up from his tablet. The Ouroboros, that is Vinny Rizzo's old crew sigil. Dante's head snapped toward him. Vinny? He's dead. He's supposed to be, Silvio said. He disappeared 6 months ago. Right after the wharf deal went bad, we thought he ran, if he is alive, and working with the 'Ndrangheta. Dante's expression was murderous. A traitor. This was not just an attack, it was a betrayal. Find him. Find every warehouse Vinny ever used as a hideout. Go. The room emptied in a flurry of motion. Dante turned to Lena. You will stay here. You will not move. But I know where I saw that van, Lena insisted, her mind racing. There was an old delivery depot near my diner. I saw a van like that, parked there for days. I did not think anything of it. You will give the location to Silvio, and you will stay here, Dante commanded. He grabbed her arms, his grip bruising. Do you understand me? I have lost my son. I will not lose you, too. He left. Lena stood in the empty penthouse for a full hour, the silent screaming. She was a possession, a fragile thing to be protected. She was the one who sat and waited while the men handled the real danger. But Dante was wrong. He was looking for Vinny's old hideouts. He was not looking for the place Vinny would go now. The 'Ndrangheta crew, the ones who had followed her. They knew her neighborhood, they knew her routes. They had been watching. She grabbed a set of car keys from a bowl by the door, left behind by one of Dante's men. She took the burner phone Dante had given her. She defied him. She took the service elevator down to the parking garage, her heart hammering. She got into an anonymous black sedan and drove, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the wheel. She drove not to the penthouse, but to the industrial wasteland near her old apartment. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows over the outskirts of Ravenshade. The district was a graveyard of dead industry. She found the depot, a massive, crumbling brick warehouse, surrounded by a chain-link fence, and parked just inside the open gate. Hidden in the shadow of a loading dock was a white delivery van. On its side, faded but unmistakable, was a painting of a black snake eating its own tail. She parked the car 3 blocks away and ran, her cheap boots slipping on the cracked pavement. She got to the fence, her breath tearing at her lungs. Her fingers fumbled with the burner phone. She hit the only number programmed into it. Dante answered on the first ring. Lena, where are you? His voice was a whip crack of fury. I found him, she panted, crouching behind a rust-eaten dumpster. The old shipping depot, Warehouse 7, the van is here. He is here. Dante, I know it. She heard him curse, a vicious, sharp sound. I'm sending a team. It will take 15 minutes. Do not move. Do not go inside. Lena, swear to me. A thin, high cry cut through the air. It was Leo. I cannot, Lena whispered. She hung up the phone. She found a side door. The lock rusted through. She pushed it open, wincing as the hinges screamed in the silence. She slipped inside. The warehouse was vast and dark, smelling of motor oil, stagnant river water, and mold. A single, bare bulb hung from the high rafters, illuminating a small circle of light in the center. In that circle, Leo was tied to a metal chair. A man was standing over him, backhanding him across the face. Shut up! Shut your damn mouth, kid! It was Vinny Rizzo, older, scarred, but unmistakably the man Dante had called a brother in old photographs. 2 other men, the same rough 'Ndrangheta soldiers who had attacked her, were playing cards on a nearby crate. The boss will be here soon, one of the men said. He wants to deal with Dante himself. Vinny, you just make sure the kid is quiet. I got this, Vinny sneered. He loomed over Leo. Your father. He's getting soft, you know? Cares more about his new waitress than his own business. It is pathetic. Lena's blood boiled. The fear vanished, replaced by a pure, cold rage she had never known she possessed. She had to buy time. Dante was 15 minutes away. She looked around. To her left was a tall, unstable shelf of old, metal barrels. She took a deep breath. She ran from the shadows and shoved the shelf with all her strength. It toppled with a catastrophic, echoing crash. Metal slammed against concrete, a thunderous noise that ripped through the warehouse. "What the hell was that?" one of the card players yelled, jumping up and pulling a gun. "Search the perimeter," Vinny ordered. "Now!" The two men fanned out, their guns raised, disappearing into the vast darkness. Vinny turned, annoyed, back to Leo. "Just noise." "I do not think so." Vinny spun around. Lena stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, her hands raised. His eyes widened, then narrowed in cruel amusement. Well. The little waitress. Come to save the day. You just made my job a hell of a lot easier. He grabbed her, yanking her forward and pressing the cold, hard barrel of a pistol to her temple. He dragged her into the light. "Come on out, boys. Look what I found." The two men reappeared from the shadows. "It is just her. She's not just anything," Vinny growled. "She is the reason Dante is weak, and she is going to be the last thing he sees." He held her tight, his arm like a steel band across her throat. Leo was crying, his small body shaking. "Leave her alone! Leave her alone! Quiet, kid!" The massive, rolling metal door of the warehouse slid open with a deafening screech. Silhouettes, a dozen of them, black, armed, and silent. In the center, standing tall, was Dante. "Let them go, Vinny," Dante said. His voice was not human. It was a flat, dead thing. "You are a little late, boss." Vinny laughed, pressing the gun harder against Lena's head. She could smell the oil on the metal. "You got soft. You let this trash get in your head. You forgot who you are. Let them go. Drop your weapons, all of you, or she dies right here." Dante did not move. He slowly, deliberately raised his own pistol. Vinny's eyes widened. "He is bluffing. He will not shoot her." "You are right," Dante said. He fired. It was not at Vinny. It was at the man standing to Vinny's left. The shot was deafening. The man dropped without a sound. The warehouse erupted. It was not a chaotic firefight. It was a precise, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient extermination. Shouts and concussive blasts echoed off the steel roof. Lena did not see blood. She just saw Dante's men move through the shadows, saw the other men fall. In the chaos, Vinny shoved Lena to the ground, his focus now on Dante. He raised his gun to fire at his old boss. Lena, her head slamming against the concrete, scrambled on her hands and knees. She threw her entire body into Vinny's legs. He stumbled, his shot going wide, sparking off a metal rafter. He snarled, turning to kick her, but it was too late. Marco was on him, disarming him with a single, brutal twist of the wrist. It was over in 30 seconds. Silence descended, broken only by Leo's terrified sobs. Lena crawled to him, her hands fumbling with the thick ropes on his wrists. "It is okay, baby, it is okay. I am here. You are safe." She pulled him from the chair, and he buried his face in her neck, clinging to her, his small body racked with tremors. She covered his eyes, shielding him with her own body. Dante walked slowly across the floor. His men had melted back, forming a perimeter. Only Vinny was left, on his knees. Marco holding him fast, Dante stopped in front of his former lieutenant. He looked at the traitor, then at Lena, who was cradling his son. He took the gun from Marco's holster. "You touched my son," Dante whispered. He raised the pistol, pressing the barrel to Vinny's forehead. Vinny was blubbering, pleading, but Dante's face was a mask of cold, settled death. "You put your hands on her." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Dante, no!" Lena's scream ripped through the silence. Dante froze. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking. "Look at him, look at Leo. Do not do this, not in front of him. Do not let this be what he sees. Please, Dante." He stood there, frozen. The gun pressed to Vinny's head. His entire arm was trembling, a violent, visible war between the monster he was and the man he wanted to be for her. He looked at Leo, who was peeking from behind Lena's arm, his eyes wide with terror. Dante's face contorted. With a ragged, inhuman roar, he lowered the gun. He stepped back, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the weapon. He threw it to the ground. "Get him out of my sight." Dante growled. He turned his back on Vinny. Take him somewhere he will not be found. He strode across the concrete and dropped to his knees in front of Lena. He did not speak. He just reached out and pulled Leo from her arms. He crushed his son to his chest, his eyes squeezed shut, his body shuddering with the force of his relief. He held him for a long, silent minute, his face buried in Leo's hair. Then he pulled back, scanning his son for injuries. He looked at Lena. The ice in his eyes was gone, shattered. What remained was raw, unfiltered, and devastating. It was gratitude. It was awe. It was a terrifying, profound tenderness. He reached out, his rough, trembling hand cupping her jaw. His thumb brushed a streak of grime from her cheek. "You are safe," he whispered, his voice thick. He leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a brand, a vow. It was the sealing of a debt he could never repay. "You saved us," he said against her skin. "You saved us both." That night, they were not at the penthouse. They were at the sterile, anonymous safe house. Leo was asleep, sedated by a doctor and watched over by a nanny. Lena and Dante stood in the dimly lit living room, the city lights twinkling miles below. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion and a strange, heavy quiet. "He's going to have nightmares," Lena said, her voice hollow. "We all will," Dante replied. He was standing by the window, his back to her. He had not taken off his coat, which was torn and stained with grease from the warehouse floor. "You should not have come," he said. "You should have listened to me." "Then he would be dead," she replied, her voice just as flat. "Or you would be." He turned to face her. The barriers were gone. The control, the games, the distance. It had all been burned away in the warehouse. All that was left was the raw, undeniable truth. "He said I rot everything I touch," Lena whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes. He was right. No. Dante crossed the room in 2 strides. He stopped in front of her. "You do not rot. You heal." He raised his hand, his fingers tracing the bruise on her cheek where Vinny had struck her. "I am the poison, Lena, and I have dragged you into it. I am not afraid of you," she said, looking up at him. "You should be." He kissed her. It was nothing like the hungry, exploratory kiss in his kitchen. This was slow, deep, and heavy with the weight of the day. It was a kiss of desperation, an affirmation of life after staring at death. It was a drowning man taking a breath. She did not pull back. Her hands came up to grip the front of his shirt, her knuckles white, holding on to him as the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to kill them. He pulled her flush against him, his arm banding around her waist, anchoring her to him. His other hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back. His lips were rough, demanding, yet impossibly tender. He tasted of grief, of rage, and of a profound, aching relief. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. Their breathing was ragged, mingling in the small space between them. "This is madness," he whispered against her lips. "I know." She breathed. He lifted her then, one arm under her legs, the other supporting her back, as if she weighed nothing. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his throat. He carried her into the bedroom and laid her gently on the bed, following her down, his body partially covering hers. He braced himself on his elbows, looking down at her. "Lena," he said, his voice raw, "if we do this, there is no going back." "I know," she repeated. He lowered his head and kissed her again, a slow, deep promise. His hands, so used to violence, were almost reverent as they moved over her. He unbuttoned her shirt, his fingers unsteady. She felt the cool air hit her skin, followed by the heat of his touch. It was not a frantic rush. It was a slow, deliberate unwrapping. The scrape of a zipper, the rustle of clothing falling to the floor, the soft sound of skin meeting skin. He was built of hard lines and sharp edges, his body scarred and controlled. But as he touched her, his control was secondary to his need. His hands were rough, but his touch was soft. She, in turn, met his barely leashed power with a yielding, quiet strength. He moved over her, his body shuddering with a release he had held back for years. It was a collision, a healing. He buried his face in her neck, and she held him, her fingers tracing the tense, corded muscles of his back, offering a silent comfort he had forgotten existed. He brought softness to her world of sharp edges. She brought healing to his world of violence. In the sterile silence of the safe house, high above the city that had tried to tear them apart, they finally, irrevocably, found each other. The safe house, with its sterile white walls and anonymous furniture, had been a bubble, but bubbles always burst. Lena tried to go back after Dante's men, silent, thorough, and invisible, had declared her neighborhood clear and her old apartment secure. She had walked up the 4 flights of stairs, her new key in hand. The splintered wood around her old lock had been replaced, the entire door painted a fresh, neutral gray. She stepped inside. The apartment was tiny. She had never realized how small it was until she had lived in the sky. The air was stale, still faintly smelling of the old, dying roses from weeks ago. The chipped mug Leo had used was clean, sitting upside down on her drying rack. She sat on her sagging couch. The silence was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket that was no longer comforting. It was just empty. Her life, which had been a straightforward, exhausting path of survival, now felt hollow. Her heart, she realized, was no longer in this room. It was in a penthouse, with a quiet, dark-eyed boy who loved to draw, and in the arms of a man who was both a monster and a sanctuary. She lasted 2 days. On the 3rd night, there was a knock, not the polite rap of a neighbor, but a solid, measured sound. She opened the door. Dante stood in the dim, yellow-lit hallway. He looked impossibly large, his tailored suit a stark shadow against the peeling paint. He did not say hello. He just looked past her, into the small, clean room that was her entire world. His expression was tight. "This is not a home," he said. "It is a box. It is what I have," Lena said, her voice quiet. She was not afraid of him. Not anymore. "No," he said, his eyes finally meeting hers. "It is what you had. It is not safe. It will never be safe. Your men said, 'My men can stop an army. They cannot stop a rumor. They cannot stop the desperation of men who have nothing left to lose. The Ndrangheta cell is broken, but the survivors are scattered. They are rats in the walls, and you are the one thing they know I value.'" He took a step, forcing her to step back into the room. He closed the door behind him, and the tiny apartment seemed to shrink by half. "I came to offer you a permanent place," he said, his voice low. "With Leo. With me." Lena's heart, which had been so heavy, gave a painful, hopeful leap, but the lessons of her life were carved deep. A permanent place. Like the job? Like the safe house? What happens when the next threat comes? Dante, what happens when I am too much trouble? "You think this is about convenience?" he asked, a note of anger in his voice. "I think I know what it feels like to be temporary," she shot back, the old pain rising, sharp and sudden. "I know what it is to be the girl who is not worth the trouble. I know what it is to be left behind." This was the core of it, the fear that had lived with her since she was 8 years old. She opened her mouth, and the words of her past, the ones she had never spoken to anyone, spilled out. "I was never chosen. Dante, I was assigned. I lived in 12 different houses. 12, and in every single one, I was the guest, the foster kid, the burden who was just passing through. I learned to pack light. I learned not to get attached, because sooner or later, everyone leaves. Everyone lets go. I cannot be left behind again. Not by you. Not by him." Tears streamed down her face, hot and angry. She was not crying for pity. She was crying with the sheer, burning exhaustion of a lifetime of being disposable. Dante stared at her, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes were raw. He had seen violence, death, and betrayal, but this quiet, deep-seated pain was something new. He had investigated her, but the file had just been facts. This was the truth. He took her face in his hands, his rough palms cupping her cheeks, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I am not your foster parents," he said, his voice a low, fierce vow. "I am not the system that failed you. I do not let go of what is mine. And you," he said, his gaze burning into hers. "Are mine. Leo is mine. You are family, and the Moretti family does not leave anyone behind, ever." He reached into his suit jacket. He pulled out not a key, but a single, heavy black key card. "This is not a spare," he said, me pressing it into her palm and closing her fingers around it. "It is mine. It opens the private elevator. It opens the penthouse. It opens the safe in my office. It opens my life. I am not giving it to you. Lena, I am returning it. It was yours from the moment you screamed for me in that warehouse." He pulled her to him, his arms banding around her, and buried his face in her hair. "You will not be left again," he whispered. And it was not a promise. It was an oath, sealed in the dim light of her gray, lonely room. The next day, Lena did not pack. She just walked away from the apartment, carrying nothing. She took a cab to the Ravenshade Academy. She was still Leo's teacher. She was still Lena Brooks, but she was no longer temporary. Peace was a fragile thing. It lasted for 1 week. The Ndrangheta cell was not broken. It was cornered. And a cornered animal is the most vicious. They had lost their foothold, their assets, and their honor. Vinnie Rizzo's betrayal and subsequent disappearance had crippled them, but it had also focused their rage. They had one target left, the one who had started it all, the Waitress. The final ambush was not subtle. It was a declaration of war, a desperate, suicidal last stand. It happened at 3 O'Leok in the afternoon, the final bell at the academy. Lena was walking with Leo toward the private pickup lane, where Dante's Escalade was idling. Marco was at the wheel. Silvio was standing by the passenger door, his eyes scanning the perimeter. Lena felt it first, a change in the air, a dark green sedan, the same one from before. Turned the corner. Too fast. Behind it. A second, a third. Silvio saw it. "Lena, the car, now!" He shoved her and Leo toward the Escalade. Marco was already out, gun in hand, but it was too late. The sedan screeched to a halt, boxing them in. Doors flew open, men in dark clothes, armed, spilled out. It was chaos. Children screamed, parents panicked. The sharp, terrifying report of gunfire echoed off the old brick of the academy. It was not a firefight. It was an assault. Dante was not in the car. He was inside, in a meeting with the headmaster. He heard the first shot. He did not run. He moved with a speed and violence that was almost inhuman. He was in the hallway, his own weapon drawn, his voice a low roar. "Silvio, status." "Courtyard, they are here!" Silvio's voice crackled over the comms, punctuated by gunfire. Lena had shoved Leo into the footwell of the Escalade, covering his small body with her own. Glass from the car's windows shattered, raining down on them. Marco and Silvio were using the heavy vehicle as cover, their return fire precise and controlled. "Stay down!" Lena screamed at Leo over the noise, but as she looked up, she saw her, a little girl, no older than Leo, separated from her mother. She was standing frozen on the steps of the academy, clutching a pink backpack, her face a silent mask of terror. One of the rival gunmen, moving for a better angle, was heading right for her. Lena did not think. She did not plan. She just moved. "Lena, no!" Marco roared. She bolted from the Escalade, running low, serpentine, across the open courtyard. The air was alive with noise and the hot sting of ricochets. She reached the girl, grabbed her, and pulled her behind a thick stone pillar, shielding the child's small body with her own. "It is okay," Lena panted, her voice shaking. "I have got you. Close your eyes." The gunman who had been moving toward them saw her. He raised his weapon. A shot rang out, louder than the others, from the academy's doorway. The gunman fell. Dante stood there, his face carved from ice, his gun steady, his men, a second team he had stationed inside the school, poured out behind him. The ambush turned into a rout. The remaining gang members, caught in a pincer move, were outmanned and outgunned. The entire confrontation was over in less than 90 seconds. The sounds of shouting and gunfire were replaced by sirens, screams, and the cries of children. Lena, still shielding the little girl, was breathing hard. Silvio approached her. His face, usually so impassive, was marked with a begrudging, profound respect. He looked at her, at the child she was protecting, and then he looked at the neutralized threats on the lawn. He simply nodded, a gesture that said more than words ever could. She was not a liability. She was one of them. Dante was already at the Escalade, pulling a shaking, silent Leo from the footwell. He held his son, his eyes scanning the courtyard, finding Lena. He saw her, saw the child she was comforting, and his expression softened. The war was, for now, over. Peace returned. This time, it felt real. The Ndrangheta cell was gone, wiped out. The city of Ravenshade breathed. Lena moved into the penthouse. Her box from the old apartment arrived. It contained her art degree, a few worn photographs of other foster kids, and the chipped mug. She placed the mug in the massive, gleaming kitchen, a small, defiant piece of her past in her new future. She did not just become Leo's teacher. She became his anchor. She sat with him when the nightmares of the warehouse woke him, her hand on his back, her voice a low, steady comfort until he fell back asleep. She became Dante's anchor, too. She was the one person in his life who was not afraid of him, the one person who did not want anything from him. She was the calm in his storm, the safe harbor. He would come home late, the violence of his world clinging to him like a shroud, and she would be there. She would not ask where he had been. She would just sit with him, her hand in his, until the man, not the boss, came back to the surface. The seasons turned. The brutal Ravenshade winter melted into a pale, watery spring. One Saturday afternoon, the penthouse was quiet, filled with sunlight. Lena was on the floor of the living room, helping Leo with a massive drawing of a castle. "I cannot get the color right," Leo said, frustrated. He held up a blue crayon. "It is not the right blue for the sky. We just need to mix it, sweetie," Lena said, picking up a white crayon. "If you add a little white, it makes it softer. See?" She showed him, her hand guiding his. He watched, fascinated, then tried it himself. "Wow," he said, his eyes wide. He looked up at her, his face lit with a bright, uncomplicated joy. "Mom, can you help me with the dragon?" The words, so simple, so accidental, hung in the sun-drenched air. Lena froze. Her hand, the one holding the white crayon, stopped moving. Her heart felt as if it had stopped, then restarted, beating in a new, painful, wonderful rhythm. Leo, unaware of the gravity of what he had said, had already turned back to his drawing, waiting for her help. She looked up, her eyes blurred with sudden tears. Dante was standing in the doorway, watching. He had been there for how long? She did not know. He was not the boss. He was not the monster. He was just a man, leaning against the doorframe, his hands in his pockets, and he was smiling. It was not his usual curt nod, not the sharp half-smile he gave his men. It was a genuine, unguarded, transformative smile. It lit his eyes, softened the hard lines of his face, and showed her the man he was underneath the armor. He had heard it. He pushed off the doorframe and walked slowly across the room. He did not look at Leo. He only looked at her. Lena was still kneeling, paralyzed by the moment. He stopped directly behind her. He bent down and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his warmth enveloping her. She closed her eyes, leaning into his embrace. He kissed her temple, a soft, lingering touch. "You saved both of us," he whispered. "Thank you so much for listening to our story. We hope it brought you some excitement and romance. We would love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more content just like this. And do not forget to share your thoughts in English. We read every one.